boys and girls. I'm gonna have story time outside today like I wanted to. So this is my neighborhood. This is my tree. These are probably going to be my neighborhood sounds because we can't really be in charge of the sounds that happen around us when we're outside, can we? Hopefully I won't have to stop and try again if a loud car comes by or the kids that play around here get really loud and make it hard for you to hear. But I'm really glad to be out here because it's so pretty. Have you seen the leaves that are falling all over the ground? And the ones that are still up in the trees are red and orange and yellow because it's fall. It's getting closer to winter, but it's not too cold yet. It's just right for spending time outside, maybe with a fire in the evening, or maybe going out to an apple orchard and picking apples, or a pumpkin patch and picking pumpkins. It's one of my favorite times of the year. And I've got some pretty good fall stories to share with you too. And I think you're really gonna like them. So let's get started. I wonder if the birds will like our singing. Clap your hands if you love stories. Clap your hands, I know you do. I'm so glad that we could be together. Glad to share a story time with you. So our first story today is about an ant and a grasshopper. And in our story, it was just like it is for us. It was fall, and the weather was starting to get crisp and the leaves were falling, and all of the animals and all of the insects were working very hard to get ready for winter. Because when it gets cold and the snow is on the ground, it gets harder to find things to eat, and things to help keep you going until spring. So all of the animals wanted to prepare and store up all they would need, except for Mr. Grasshopper. Everyone was working really, really hard around him, but Mr. Grasshopper just didn't feel like working. He liked the weather outside very much, and he liked being out in it, and he liked the way the air felt crisp and chilly around him. But mostly, he sat back in the grass with his guitar, and he played songs, and he sang, and he danced and tapped his feet, just enjoying the weather and not doing a thing to prepare. Well, along came Miss Ant, who was one of his neighbors, and she was working extra hard, even harder than some of the other animals around her. She wanted to make sure she had enough to get through the winter. She had found a big grain of rice, which for an ant is pretty big. And she was working hard to drag it back to her house, past where Mr. Grasshopper was sitting. And she was huffing and puffing and saying, "Oh, I wish I had someone to help me with this. This is just too heavy." And she saw Mr. Grasshopper sitting there, and she said, "Hey, Mr. Grasshopper, would you please help me with this?" And Mr. Grasshopper said, "Well, that looks really, really heavy. And that looks like an awful lot of work. Maybe I'll help you in a bit, but first sit down. Have a rest. Enjoy the day. It's so beautiful. Days like this aren't going to last forever. You should enjoy the ones we have." And Miss Ant sort of sniffed and said, "I know that days like this won't last forever. That's why I'm working so hard. Because when they're gone, I won't be able to do this work anymore. You should work too, Mr. Grasshopper. Otherwise, what are you going to eat this winter?" Mr. Grasshopper just laughed. "I'm not worried about that just yet. I have got plenty of time to get ready. But if you want to waste the day just working and working and working, you go on ahead." And so Miss Ant did. She went about her way, preparing, picking up everything she thought she would need, and working and stashing all the berries and the grains and anything she thought might be helpful to get through the winter. And in the meantime, Mr. Grasshopper just sat and played his guitar and enjoyed the day, and the next day, and the next day, until Suddenly, fall was over, and winter came. And suddenly, there were no more nuts falling from the trees, and the wheat and the corn had all gone dry and then gathered away by the farmers. There was simply nothing left, and then it was starting to be buried with snow. Mr. Grasshopper got cold and hungry, and he had nothing to eat. And so he started looking around as much as he could. But everything had been gathered up by people who were smarter and thought further ahead than he did. And he felt so upset. He said, I wish I had listened to Miss Ant. I wish I'd done like all of my neighbors and prepared. He looked at them sitting with their families inside their homes, all warm and cozy and fed. And he was worried. He didn't think that if he asked them for help now, that they would give it to him. And he thought that he would deserve it if they just slammed their doors in his face. But when he crept up to Miss Ant's house, she opened the door and said, Have you learned your lesson? Come on in. I've stored plenty. Mr. Grasshopper was very, very thankful that she was willing to give him a second chance. And the next winter, he was right out there working right alongside her, making sure that they had way more than they would need for the winter. So tell me something. Do you know what a scarecrow is? That's right. It's that stuffed or sometimes made out of sticks and cloth little statue, sometimes big statue, that they have out in the middle of fields that farmers set up so that they could scare away crows and other things that will eat the food before the farmers can get it. The crows might think they're scary, but I don't think they're that scary. And for our song now, we're going to be a scarecrow. Are you ready? You think you could be Mr. Scarecrow? Here we go. I'm a little scarecrow stuffed with hay. Here I stand in the field all day. When I see the black crows, I just shout, Hey, you crows! You better get out! Let's do that one more time. I'm a little scarecrow stuffed with hay. Stuff your hay in. Here I stand in the field all day. When I see the black crows, I just shout, Hey, you crows, you better get out. Good job, scarecrows. Our second story is similar to the story I just told about the ant and the grasshopper in some ways. This is a story from Africa, and it's about a hare, a rabbit, named Kalulu. Now, Kalulu was just as hard-working as Miss Ant and all those other creatures in the first story. He loved to grow as much food as he could so that he would have plenty in stock all year long. And he had lots of favorites. He loved to grow lettuces and carrots and turnips and squash. And since all of these plants grew at different times of the year, and he kept planting them in the season that they belonged, he always had a ready supply of whatever was in season. And just now, he was growing one of his very, very favorite vegetables. Elephant came walking along, big and bulky and heavy, and towering enough that he could see right over Kalulu's fence, and said, What are you doing there? Busy at work again, I see? And Kalulu said, Just tending to my garden. It's pumpkin season, and I love pumpkins, so I'm making sure that I plant plenty. Elephant said, Very fond of pumpkins myself. Do you think that if you're not too busy, you could come help me plant some pumpkins in my garden, too? Well, Kalulu was a hard worker, but he was also very smart, and he was too smart to get trapped into doing other people's work for them, just because the other people weren't as interested in working as hard as he was. So he said, I have a lot of work to do here, I'm afraid, but If you'd like, I can lend you my hoe and some pumpkin seeds. Then you can plant them yourself. They're not really hard to grow, pumpkins. Once they're in the ground, you don't have to do much at all to take care of them. Well, Elephant didn't like that idea nearly as much. But he thanked Kalulu, and he took the hoe and the seeds back to his own garden. Once he was there, he sort of huffed and looked around. This particular elephant really didn't like to work hard at all. If he tried to, he would get huffy, puffy, all out of breath, and sometimes his heart would start beating so fast that he would have to sit down and take a rest. So once he started working, all he ended up doing was digging a few holes before he got tired, and then he sort of dumped the seeds willy-nilly into the holes, and then shoved some dirt on top and went back in his house and took a nap. Meanwhile, Kalulu was digging lots and lots of little holes, making sure that they were nicely spread out, buried just the right depth, nice and watered and ready to grow. So, when the plants started to sprout, all of Kalulu's came up healthy and green, and they started bursting out with pumpkin flowers everywhere you looked. Most of Elephant's died because they were too close together, and the ones that did come up were sort of yellow and sickly and didn't look like they were going to produce much of anything at all. No one looked at them, thought that they were going to give him any pumpkins, certainly. And Elephant just kept getting more and more jealous and greedy every time he walked past Kalulu's garden. Pretty soon, there were several really big, really fat orange pumpkins growing in Kalulu's garden. And he was so excited about the day he was going to get to pick them and enjoy them. Every day he would tend to them and water them and make sure they were doing okay, just waiting for just the right moment to harvest. But one morning, he got up and looked out of his window, and the pumpkins were all gone. He dashed outside and looked around, but there were certainly no big fat pumpkins to be seen. And it didn't take too much effort to figure out where they'd gone. There had only been one person in the neighborhood who'd been watching those pumpkins as closely as Kalulu himself had. But Kalulu was too smart to just go barging over there and making a big fuss. After all, there were still lots of yellow flowers all over the vines, getting ready to make plenty more big fat pumpkins. And he hatched a plan. He didn't have to wait too long before little pumpkins turned into medium-sized pumpkins, turned into giant pumpkins. And he was seeing Elephant peeking over his fence more and more often. So, one evening, as soon as it got dark, Kalulu went out into his garden, and he found the biggest pumpkin he could, and he cut off the top, and he dug out all of the seeds and the membranes that were inside the pumpkin until it was hollowed out. Then Kalulu climbed into the pumpkin and pulled the top back on top where he had climbed in, so that everything looked innocent out in the garden and nobody would suspect that he was hiding in there. And then he waited. He sat back and waited. And with him, he had a drum. His plan was, he figured, when Elephant came sneaking into the garden, he was going to bang on that drum as loudly as he could and scare Elephant away. But sitting inside that pumpkin, as cozy and snug as it was around him, it started getting warm, and it was soft and comfortable in there, and Kalulu dozed off. He didn't hear the heavy footsteps that stomped into his garden. He didn't hear the sounds of the rustling of the leaves. In fact, he didn't wake up until he felt the pumpkin that he was in be lifted into the air. And before he could do anything about it, his pumpkin was being shoved into a warm, tight tunnel. the elephant had swallowed the pumpkin whole. Well, there wasn't a lot that Kalulu could do in that moment, and he was pretty panicked. But then he had another idea. He crept out of that pumpkin as close as he could, and he started banging on the drum from inside the elephant. And the elephant jumped, was startled, and he felt the vibrations and the noise inside of him, and he groaned with fear and with discomfort. And he quickly ran out of the garden back to his house and curled up into a heap on the floor. And he went to sleep. And about that time, Kalulu climbed out of the elephant's throat, slid down his tusk, and crept out of the house back to his garden. And from that day on, Elephant decided he didn't really like pumpkins anymore. He thought they disagreed with his stomach. He would stick to other kinds of vegetables instead, he figured. All right, we're going to sing a song about apples now, another good fall food. And I want you to think about, what is your favorite kind of apple? What color is your favorite kind of apple? I like all kinds of apples. I like red ones, I like green ones, I like pretty much every apple that's in the store or in the orchard or growing on the trees that are out here around me. So I want you to think about your favorite kind of apple and listen along, see if I sing it. And you can pretend that you're eating apples as we do this song, or you can just clap your hands. Here we go. I love red apples, I love red apples, and I could eat them every day. I love the sweet ones, I love the tart ones. Please don't take my apples away. Do you like red apples? What about green ones? I love green apples, I love green apples, and I could eat them every day. I love them sour, they give me power. Please don't take my apples away. What other kind of colors do apples come in? Yellow? Do you like yellow apples? I love yellow apples, I love yellow apples, and I could eat them every day. I love them crunchy, I love them munchy. Please don't take my apples away. Do they come in any other colors? I'm not sure that they do. If they do, you probably shouldn't eat them. I love red apples, I love red apples, and I could eat them every day. I love the sweet ones, I love the tart ones. Please don't take my apples away. A bug started crawling on my hand. Maybe he thought I had some apples. Well, I hope you had a good time today out here having story time under the autumn trees with me. I want you to remember from both those stories, it can be fun to lay around and not do much of anything, but in the fall, there's lots of work to be done. I'm gonna have to get out here and rake leaves. But if I put them in a big pile, I'll have something I can jump into. So it's all worth it, isn't it? All right, here we go. Let's get a big stretch. I want to see you reach for the tree branches and touch the floor, grass. Stand up again. Let's do some more. Touch your head. And now your knees. Up to your shoulders. Like this, you see. Reach for the tree branches. And touch the floor. That's all there is. There isn't any more. Go outside and have a good day. See you later.